Kate Jones, a 26-year-old nurse, was fired from the hospital where she worked after slapping her boss. In shock, she explained the reason to a homeless man who consoled her. The next day, a limousine was waiting at her doorstep, and she had no idea that her life would never be the same again. On that Monday, Kate Jones woke up to the sound of her alarm clock beside her bed. She hurriedly drank a cup of coffee and left scrambled eggs on the table, also placing food in the usual spot for her cat. She grabbed the medication she needed and took it to the other room in the house. The house showed signs of water damage on the ceiling. The furniture was very worn, and the carpet was frayed. Nothing in the house had been renovated or well cared for in a long time. Things were tough, but John Jones, Kate's father, kept a lively spirit. When Kate entered the room with the medication, he was already awake and in good spirits. He kissed his daughter on the forehead and took his medication, looking closely at her face. Even though she had just woken up, Kate looked worried once again. He had noticed this weeks earlier, but his daughter had said it was nothing, just the busy routine at work. But Mr. Jones knew the daughter he had raised and sensed there was something more. "Is there something wrong, my dear? Your father is old and sick, but I can listen and even help," he said. "It's nothing, Dad. I told you everything is fine," Kate replied, handing him a pack of pills. John took his medication and wished his daughter a great day. Before leaving the house, Kate put a pill in her purse. On the bus on her way to the hospital where she worked, she looked at the pill, sighed, and popped it into her mouth. Mr. Jones was right. Kate wasn't okay, and it had been a month since she could only manage her anxiety this way. Working at that hospital had become a nightmare, but she couldn't afford to just quit. She needed to support herself, pay the bills, and most importantly, ensure her father took his medication on time. When the bus made a sudden stop, Kate realized she had been lost in negative thoughts and had missed her stop. She got off at the next stop and walked back. If it weren't for the pill, she would have screamed and cried in anger right there on the sidewalk. Inside the hospital, Kate was changing when she heard a man's voice in the next room. She knew very well whose voice it was. It was the voice of the surgeon, the man Kate worked with several times a week. She felt her anxiety rise and hurried to finish getting ready. Before leaving, she took a deep breath. She hoped for the best that day, but as soon as she opened the locker room door, she came face to face with the surgeon. Rick Donovan was a 42-year-old man, imposing and good-looking. "Miss Kate, long time no see," said the doctor. "Why haven't you come to see me in the last few days, huh?" Kate tried to keep control, struggling not to appear scared. "I was sent to another department. They needed experienced nurses in the other wing." The surgeon gave a short smile and replied, "Ah, I know. You must be experienced, indeed." The woman tried to walk away, but the surgeon continued talking and demanding her attention. "I brought a little something for you," he tried to say, but Kate responded that she needed to hurry to attend to the patients. She was already late because of the bus and didn't want to be fired. "Fired? Look, as far as I'm concerned, you'd never be fired." But the surgeon had lied. A few hours later, Kate crossed the hospital reception for the last time, in tears, and was out on the street, fired by the administrative director, and now she didn't know what to do. Distressed, Kate felt as if a lump of worry was lodged in her chest. She had to put an end to the situation, but things had spiraled out of control. Kate quickened her pace toward the only nearby place she frequented and where she felt safe, a cafe across the street from the hospital. She sat in a chair on the patio and was soon served an espresso. She wanted to clear her mind, but she was in shock. She felt guilty, lost, and alone. Suddenly, a deep, caring voice addressed her. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Kate snapped out of her trance and looked at him in surprise. A homeless man was looking at her. "Am I okay?" Kate repeated. "Yes. Why are you crying? Are you all right?" Only then did Kate realize a tear was on her face. She wiped it away and composed herself, looking around to see if anyone else was paying attention to her. "It's nothing, it'll pass," the woman replied, noticing that the stranger was wearing very old and stained clothes. But he was the only one who had shown concern for her. The man then said goodbye, but she didn't let him leave. Instead, she asked if he would like to sit down and eat something. She knew she had to manage her money very carefully from now on, but she felt that this action was worth it. The man agreed and sat down with her. He introduced himself as Ian Bradfield, and she simply as Kate. The man then didn't beat around the bush. He looked at her with his bright, caring eyes. You know, Kate, on the streets, I've come across many people living intense dramas, and I can tell you're going through a tough time. Sorry if I'm being intrusive. I just want to say that I'm a good listener and someone you're unlikely to see again, so feel free to vent if you need to, he said. Kate smiled and thanked him. She said he was right. She was having a terrible day because she was a nurse and had been fired. I worked at that hospital over there, she said, pointing to the building across the street. But I yelled at the chief surgeon in front of everyone, Kate revealed, feeling guilty and ashamed. If you yelled, there must have been a reason, the homeless man pointed out. Kate was silent for a few seconds. Then she took a deep breath and began telling Ian everything. The words came out as if they had been bottled up for a long time. The fact was that since Rick had arrived at the hospital, transferred from another facility, her routine had become a nightmare. In the first few weeks, the doctor acted as if he didn't even notice the nurse's presence in the operating room and the hospital corridors. But one day, the doctor spontaneously touched her shoulder during a work conversation. From then on, the touches became more frequent, as did the intense and embarrassing looks in her direction while she worked. During one surgery, he pretended to teach her how to perform a procedure and held her by the waist in front of the entire team, who seemed to ignore the action. Despite being married, the man had once insinuated that the two should become closer, as it could bring advantages to Kate's career at the hospital. The nurse simply changed the subject and walked away. She had already thought about talking to management and explaining the situation, but what would she say? Those advances were disgusting to her, but at the same time, very subtle to an outsider. Moreover, the man had made it clear that he was a personal friend of the hospital director, and it would be the word of a powerful married chief surgeon against that of a poor single nurse. She swallowed it all in silence, as losing her job was out of the question. It would be highly irresponsible to stop her father's treatment and have no way to keep a roof over his and her own heads. But what happened minutes before she ran to the cafe that day was the last straw for her. After a successful surgery in which Rick had saved another man's life, the two were cleaning up, and the man was boasting about his ability to save lives, even saying that with everything he had learned from science, he could even avoid God's calls. Rick was visibly excited about that and added, "Only one thing excites me more than saving a person's life, Kate. You." The nurse was completely taken aback and paralyzed by hearing that. So Rick took advantage of Kate's moment of vulnerability, grabbed her hand, and shoved it into the front pocket of his pants. "Feel here the little gift I have for you." In a quick reflex, the woman pulled her hand out of Rick's pocket and slapped him hard across the face. He looked at her with fury, but restrained himself from exploding. His fist was clenched. With anger in his eyes, he said she was ungrateful and crazy for ruining her career over a silly joke made by him. "I hope you know how to use a broom and wash dishes because you'll never set foot in a hospital in this city again. Now get out of my sight," he said. And that's when Kate ran out of the hospital, to the receptionist's surprise, and was now sitting in that cafe. Kate sighed in relief after getting off her chest what had been bothering her for weeks. But she realized that Ian, the man in front of her, was probably going through much worse things on the street. "Sorry, I think I talked too much," she said. Ian replied that she didn't need to worry. "I hope you feel better now that you've told all this," he said. Kate thanked Ian for being a good listener and ordered a sandwich for him and another cup of coffee. They talked for a while longer, and Kate found out that Ian had worked as a janitor at a multinational company, but it had gone bankrupt, and he never received his severance pay. Without money, he was evicted from his small apartment and ended up living on the streets. He survived on odd jobs and donations and never got another job because of his clothes and appearance. But he said, laughing and with bright eyes, "Kate, if I were your boss at the hospital, I'd hire you back onto the team." Kate thanked the man for his kind words. The conversation was so pleasant that Kate didn't notice the time passing. It was getting dark, and she had to go home. Ian offered to walk with her. To avoid any problems, he would walk a few meters behind her, so he could protect Kate from any trouble. and no one would think she was with a disheveled and dirty man like him. But Kate shook her head and smiled at him, saying that he had a good heart and good intentions, so she didn't mind being seen walking with him. Ian nodded, clearly moved by what he had just heard. And so they walked together to the house Kate shared with her father. At the door, Kate said she had food ready and would heat it up for Ian to have dinner that night. The man thanked her for her generosity, but said it wasn't necessary. Kate tried to insist, but Ian just smiled warmly and stepped back, bidding her farewell. Even at night, his eyes shone. Kate entered the house and sat on the living room couch. It took only a few seconds for her to succumb to dark thoughts again. What should she do? Report the man to the police? Sue him? How would she prove it all? Kate's father, Mr. John Jones, came out of his room and found his daughter with that same look of contained agony. He didn't ask anything, just approached her and hugged her, saying he would help her, but he needed to know what was going on. "Sweetheart, you can always count on your dad. I'll always be here for you." Kate hugged her father and let herself cry silently. She was going to tell her father everything, but not at that moment. Kate ended up falling asleep right there on the couch, resting on her father. Mr. Jones got up carefully not to wake his daughter and covered her with a blanket. He kissed her forehead and returned to his room for the last time. The next morning, her phone alarm went off, and Kate got up quickly. She had slept on the couch and didn't want the noise to wake her father. She was ready to look for a job and dressed appropriately. She started preparing breakfast, but the house was eerily quiet. The only sound was her cat meowing and staring at her, standing in front of the room where her father slept. Before leaving the house, Kate grabbed the medication, as she did every morning, and went to the room. She opened the door, and Mr. John Jones was still asleep. But something was different. The pale color of his skin, the texture of the muscles on his face. That's when all the pills in her hand fell to the floor. During her father's funeral, Kate couldn't believe what was happening. She had dedicated so much to his treatment. The night before, he seemed fine and had said she could always count on him. Did he sense his end was near? And why did it have to happen at such a tough time in her life? Few people attended the funeral, but everyone seemed deeply moved. Those who knew John Jones had great admiration for him and his playful and optimistic spirit. When the coffin lid was closed, it was the most painful moment of the nurse's life. After the burial, she walked alone to the cemetery exit. She was without a job and without her father. Just as she was about to hail a taxi, she noticed a luxury car on the other side of the street. A man approached her and said he was very sorry for her loss. Then he handed Kate a card, saying his client was eager to talk to her, and it was urgent. Kate wasn't in the right frame of mind to ask what it was about, and the man only said that despite the pain of the moment, she shouldn't miss the opportunity. "See you soon, miss," the man said, returning to the car. That week, Kate didn't want to get out of bed and face an empty apartment. It felt like all her motivation to find a new job had evaporated. The pain of grief came in waves, but in moments of calm, she remembered the man who had given her the card. And it was when she was desperate and felt there was no way out that she decided to send a message to the number on the card. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang, and Kate was ready and waiting. Her appearance wasn't the best, but she was trying to understand what this meant. Maybe it was a light at the end of the tunnel? Outside, the same luxury car from the previous week was parked. "Good morning, Miss Kate. My boss wants to meet you. Will you come with me?" he said, indicating for her to get in the car. Kate had no idea who could own such a car in the city, let alone someone who would want to meet her, a simple unemployed nurse with a maxed-out credit card at that point. After her father's funeral, she followed the man to the car, and they drove off. The vehicle stopped in the parking lot of a large and modern office building in one of the most expensive areas of the city. Indeed, the nurse had never been there. After taking an elevator up 15 floors, she was introduced to the powerful woman who ran everything there. She was very well dressed and had a serious demeanor, but she was also charismatic. Next to her was a man who immediately spoke to her. "Kate, I'm so glad you came. First of all, my condolences," he said very carefully. Then he smiled. Kate didn't recognize him right away because she was still trying to process everything. But that broad smile and those bright eyes were familiar to her. It was Ian Bradfield, the homeless man she had met on the street. But now he was different. He was wearing clean clothes, and his beard and hair were well-groomed. What did all this mean? Ian explained that Kate had left him very worried. He returned to the cafe several times, hoping to meet her again because he wanted to know if she was okay. But the nurse never showed up again. However, he found at the cafe a very distinguished group that appeared to be all business people. Among them was a woman who was the center of attention. One of the men had a hospital ID badge, and Ian thought he could ask him about the nurse he was looking for. When the homeless man approached, the group's security intervened, preventing him from getting closer. That's when the woman in the group noticed what was happening and wanted to know what the homeless man wanted. All the men fell silent, and Ian realized she must be the most important person there. So he told her everything he knew. He said Kate's name and all the details of what had happened between her and the chief surgeon. The powerful woman listened with her mouth open. She revealed her name was Megan Stewart, and to Ian's surprise, she was the owner of that hospital chain. She immediately ordered the men accompanying her to drop everything they were doing that week to investigate the matter as quickly as possible. And the woman really kept her word. Her team launched an internal investigation, and it wasn't long before other nurses, housekeepers, and receptionists began to speak out about how the surgeon would joke around and try to approach them with suggestive conversations. After learning about all these allegations, Megan decided to dig deeper. She looked into the hospitals in her network where the surgeon had previously worked and investigated if any other complaints surfaced. What the hospital chain owner discovered was shocking. The surgeon had, by force, gone all the way with a housekeeper inside the hospital premises, drugging her with medication diluted in a glass of water. When the housekeeper revealed the date of the incident to Megan's team, they searched all the archived security camera footage from the hospital and found the exact moment when Rick Donovan diluted a substance in a glass of water and offered it to the housekeeper. Then the woman entered an empty ICU room to change the bed linen, and the man followed her. 15 minutes later, he was seen leaving the ICU, walking briskly. Watching that disgusted Megan Stewart, and the housekeeper concluded by saying that it all started weeks earlier, with the man subtly touching her shoulder. With all the evidence gathered, the case was opened. During the trial period, Kate Jones was not only reinstated at the hospital, but also promoted to head nurse. Ian Bradfield's efforts were also rewarded. Megan hired him for general services at the hospital and compensated him financially for helping a woman like her. The amount was enough for him to restart his life with dignity. A few months later, the judge in the case handed down his verdict. Rick Donovan was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Kate and the other victims could finally sleep in peace. After the sentencing, Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come along. "I wish you had met my father," she said, placing flowers on the grave. "I will meet him. You're going to tell me all about him." The two walked together towards the cemetery exit. Kate took Ian's hand, and he didn't resist. And so they left, hand in hand. From time to time, Kate and Ian are seen together having coffee at the same place where they met, but now as a couple. If you like this story, please leave a like, and this other video that's appearing on the screen now will probably move you as well. Enjoy your viewing, and see you in the next video.